Ladies and gentlemen, Excellencies, it is my pleasure to welcome you for a very topical discussion today that is organized by Latvian Transatlantic Organization in cooperation with GlobSec, Ukraine's Embassy, and University of Latvia Faculty of Social Sciences. The topic of today's discussion is Ukraine and NATO. Today's, I would say, painful lessons for tomorrow, and what can we learn from this. My name is Sandy Schraders. I'm a fellow at the Baltic Defense College, responsible for Russian and Russian military and strategic studies. At the Baltic Defense College, we do different kind of projects and things that you can follow and also use for the learning and enhancement of your own knowledge. I'm really happy to be there, and I would like to advertise one thing, like if you want to learn a little bit more about Russia, here is the latest publication which you can find from the bodovkol.org website, free of charge in PDF version. It has received quite positive feedback from Center of Policy, from Center of European Policy Studies, and is marked as one of the transatlantic reads. So I would strongly encourage you to visit the bodovkol.org website to view the publication and check out a couple of really topical articles on Russia's military capabilities, on the youth learning and education, and all those challenges that we are facing today. I would like to say we were right, sadly. The Baltic states, Poland, and also the like-minded nations as Ukraine and Georgia, we can sadly say today we were right. Before we start the discussion, I would like to introduce all the panelists. I'm happy to see Ambassador Shota Gvineria, who is my colleague at the Baltic Defense College, Colonel Kaspars Pudans, who is the first brigade commander of the Latvian National Guard, Natalia Arno, the president of Free Russia Foundation, Dr. Marcin Zaborowski, who is policy director of Future of Security program at GlobSec, one of the leading debate forums on security and international security challenges, and Yuri Zakarchuk, who is a counselor at Embassy of Ukraine in the Republic of Latvia. First, I would like to give the floor to the experts to discuss broader challenges. And I know my colleague, Ambassador Shota Gvineria, has recently published a book about hybrid challenges to the Euro-Atlantic security. Therefore, I wanted to give the floor to him first to outline this broader picture. So, Ambassador Gvineria, the floor is yours.
Well, hello, everybody. Thanks for the invitation to this very interesting and timely discussion. Unfortunately, we are witnessing the worst case scenario now unfolding in Ukraine. There is a full-fledged war. People are dying, and the solution to the war is still nowhere to be seen. And I will speak a little bit to what led us to this situation and what was sort of the how did we get here, right? And it was a very clearly visible pattern, at least as Sandis kindly mentioned, for us along the eastern flank, that actually the objectives of the Russian Federation, which was, by the way, communicated very clearly by Putin many times and was proven by his aggressive actions in many parts of the world, was not actually something that we learned from. So there was a cascade of miscalculations on both sides, I must say. And Putin was telling us what he was going to do. We were looking at his pattern of how he was doing things in Georgia, starting in 2008, then continued with the annexation of Crimea, then conflict in eastern Ukraine. Then he was grabbing all the opportunities along the way, right? Because then he was tightening his grip on Belarus. He intervened in the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, which was opened And we have learned that actually this frozen conflict is not the term we can rely on, and these conflicts are actually very easy to unfreeze. And there as well, the Russian Federation was able to extend its influences gradually, step by step. And then we ended up in the situation when the European Union was spending millions to help and support the Eastern Partnership countries. NATO was spending a lot of resources and time in training and equipping the partners from the Eastern flank. But Russia ended up having a military presence in all 6 Eastern Partnership countries as a result of this chain of aggressive policies. And then, it was very clear from the outset that Putin was using this kill chain, if you may, or the pattern. He was creating the problem. He was escalating to the maximum extent. Everybody was scared to death. Everybody was running around with no plan how to deal with the crisis. And then he, in this ultimate boiling hot situation and phase of conflict, would extract concessions, secure the gains, and repeat again, in a different point in time, in different geography. So this was his pattern of waging hybrid warfare, creating the problems and then inviting everybody to sit around the table to negotiate this problem. So this time, he actually thought that the same thing could have happened in Ukraine. So there was this miscalculation from his side, obviously, that the West, the collective West, let's say EU, NATO, the United States, all together, would react to his actions in Ukraine in the same exact way that they have been reacting to the previous crisis that he was creating along the way. But there, I think he made a dramatic, paramount mistake. He couldn't calculate the strength of the Ukrainian people and the state and the leadership in Kiev. And he miscalculated about the readiness of the Western institutions and nations to help Ukraine in its fight for sovereignty and territorial integrity against invading army. So this combination of things, which I think led to the collapse of Russia's military adventure in Ukraine, was something that must have inevitably happened to someone that has spent last 2 years in bunker, and we could see the state of his let's say, relations with the outside world by the fact that in the middle of the war, he's meeting his defense minister and the chief of armed forces at the table with the 5 meters distance. So it is actually something that tells a lot. I'm not going to speculate about his mental health or anything similar to this. I'm just saying that these miscalculations are basically very logical, because for someone who has been isolated from the reality and have been told about what he wanted to hear for years, could have thought that he can get away with another military adventure in Ukraine easily. But what we see now is that his blackmail didn't work for the first time in a very long time. He has lost information warfare for the first time in a very long time. And then, despite this nuclear blackmailing, despite open threats, to use different types of weapons of mass destruction, etc., the response and the resolve of Ukraine, backed up with a very strong, unified, consolidated help and support from the West, is still there. So he actually, I think, doesn't know what to do in this situation, because he has to adjust, most definitely. I also have a lot of doubts about the success of his military campaign. And sometimes we see these maps, with the red spots on it that are meant to show how much of the Ukrainian territories Russia is controlling at this point. I want to very clearly point out one thing. What we see on those maps are not the sign of control, and most of these territories are open fields. So if we look at how much really Russian armed forces are able to occupy and control on the ground, it's only one major city, Kherson, and even there, it is very difficult for the occupying forces to control the city, because the population, the citizens, are fiercely pushing back with the bare hands, against the tanks and the occupying forces. So I would not overestimate the achievements in terms of control there on the ground. Of course, the damage is absolutely tragic. We're losing a lot of lives, and the magnitude of destruction is really something that is the catastrophe, and this is a catastrophic event. But still, in terms of the objectives of the Russian Federation that they wanted to achieve down there on the ground, it's nowhere close to what they could expect after this much period of time of fighting there on the ground. So I would, just to summarize my main point here, I would say that it is a inevitable defeat for Putin. Now it's about how long he will be able to stretch this madness and how much more lives and destruction he will be able to drag along with him. Because everybody in Russia, his inner circle or outside his circle, understands that Russia will never be a normal country under his rule. And that he is actually someone that we cannot negotiate anything with. Even if we negotiate something with him, it will not be worth even the paper that it is written on. It's not the first time we say this, but now it is actually proven that we are not going to negotiate anything with Putin, and the solutions will be hardly include anything that he can offer to us at this point in time. And I don't think he is ready to offer anything because he has crossed this let's say Rubicon and the red line at this point. So we have to think about what is our objective. Is it to stop war, or is it to stop Putin? And then there is a great big difference between these two objectives. I hope that the West understands that Ukraine cannot stop Putin on their own, no matter how big the support will be. So sooner we realize that actually Putin has entered in war with the West in Ukraine, and Ukraine is the battlefield at this point, the better for everybody. So these are just my provocative thoughts for to start, the discussion, and hopefully we will have a chance to go into more details later on. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Shota, for your really crisp and also realistic, and I would say sobering remarks about Putin being stuck in a moment and really cannot get out from it in any reasonable way at home or in terms of war against Ukraine. I think you touched upon two very important things. One is the war in Ukraine that we might try to stop, that we might try to facilitate by helping Ukrainians, but then there's the other side of this story, which probably stems from the inside Russia, and I couldn't imagine a better candidate for the next remarks as Natalia Arno, who is the president of Free Russia Foundation. And I know Natalia has worked for the International Republican Institute in the past when democratic reforms seemed to be possible, but she was also forced to lead because of this autocratic tightening. And now you're promoting democratic values for Russia from abroad. Therefore, I would like to give a floor to you. Natalia, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Salis, for the invitation. I'm very honored to participate in this event with such distinguished panelists. Well, yes, Shota was absolutely correct. It's absolutely worst scenario, worst possible nightmare, what is happening with this full-scale unleashed war in Ukraine. And many of us hoped that it's just a bluff. But at the same time, we always understood that we should look at the behavior pattern of Putin. We should study his psychology and his background and how he even got to power by blowing up apartment buildings. So it probably shouldn't be a surprise for anybody. We're just hoping for that it's a bluff because he's just flexing his flabby muscles because it's just suicidal for him. It's not even beneficial for Putin's regime. We always knew that all dictatorships eventually fall and all dictators are mortal, but we just didn't know when and how this Putin's regime will collapse. And now we are seeing this is how it's going to happen. I don't have any doubts about that. And Shota was saying that Baltic countries and Poland and of course Ukraine and Georgia were saying that see, we were right about all these warnings about Putin and his actions. I would also add that us pro-democracy Russians, we were saying about this also from the very beginning. We actually were the first victims of Putin. Putin occupied Russia first. The first thing he did, he took media, made media capture, and understanding that those who control information controls the world, controls the environment, and created this unchallenged narrative to his power. And all these years, again, we were laboratory rats for Putin's regime. We were the first ones to be hacked, the first ones to be prosecuted, jailed, murdered, including or attempt to murder with Novichok and murdered with polonium or whatever. And many of us are forced to exile. Good news about all this absolutely terrible situation is that we now see that expiration date of Putin's regime has rapidly expedited. And we were discussing before about this problem of 2024, this next presidential elections, but I think it's not a problem any longer. And again, for years, we've been saying that Putin's regime is illegitimate. We have never had free and fair elections in Russia. We had this constitutional coup in 2020. Even after that, it was enough to recognize it illegitimate. But with everything else, yes, what's happening now again, yes, the worst nightmare, the worst possible thing. And it's a very agonizing and traumatizing experience for everybody, for us pro-democracy Russians, especially. We, as everybody else, we are shocked, we are angry, we are outraged, but we're also ashamed. We also understand that, yeah, this collective responsibility is on us. For years, we've also been saying, please differentiate between pro-democracy Russians and pro-Putin Russians. And again, it's now, yes, it's collective responsibility. We should be all together to help Ukraine, first of all. Shota was also was posing a question if it's stop the war, stop Putin. I agree, yes, of course, the immediate need is to stop the war as soon as possible. But it's also not even to stop Putin, it's to stop Putinism. Because even after the war, Russia will be, it won't be the same. I am not even sure it will be in the same borders after the war. But in some form, Russia will be there, and it's very important that there is a regime change. Now, this it has been such a radical term for so many years, but again, I don't think it's a radical term any longer. And there are people, very capable people, very professional people who can rebuild Russia from these ashes and this disgrace that Putin created. And so I just can assure that we are the biggest allies of Ukrainians. We are doing absolutely everything, including helping, like donating to Ukrainian army and donating to any possible humanitarian causes. My team is evacuating people from Kiev. I evacuated the entire team, multinational team, citizens of Russia, Belarus, Ukraine, and Kazakhstan. But the Russian team member, he stayed in Kiev. He said, "No, I'm not going to leave. I'm going to contribute to the victory." He's working with us in the mornings, and in the evenings he makes entire tank obstacles, I don't know, hedgehogs, whatever they call, but then so many other Russians are trying to do anything, those who understand, those who are well informed, even inside the country, they're thinking, how can we again stop the war, what can we do? And it's important not to neglect them, not to underestimate their potential, the power. We do need the second front. This information campaign is very important. If there is a big pressure from inside the country, I think it's good. And I see that anti-war movement is growing. Of course, we need millions, but we still have more and more cities protesting. Like 2 Sundays ago, it was 57 cities. Last Sunday, it was already 115 cities. We already see a lot of people, different professions, teachers, doctors, lawyers, students, and so on, writing letters, doing other stuff. Of course, it's not enough, but still, we already had 15,000 protesters detained. I don't know if yesterday's single protest, the most famous single protest on ORT channel, was it staged or was it a real one? But whatever it is, even if it's just Konstantin Ernst trying to wash his reputation, which won't help him, I think still it's very important because, first of all, it might be a manifestation of split of elites, quite a clear one, but also if it inspires thousands or even more to not to be silent, not to to speak out, it's also a good thing. What I would say is this is a huge, it's not only a real military war when Russian military is shelling Ukrainian cities and not differentiating between armed forces or civilians, between adults or children, and does all these other absolutely horrible crimes, which I hope, I always wanted Putin, to see Putin in The Hague. Now I think it's more likely he'll be in Nuremberg, or even I won't be that opposed to his fate of Gaddafi. But besides this military actions, it's very important that, again, information campaign is very, very important. And as a mission on us, pro-democracy Russians, it's not only, again, to contribute to stop the war, do absolutely everything. We're pushing for sanctions, for no-fly zone, for, for increased military and humanitarian assistance to Ukraine. This is the ultimate victory of democracy and freedom, when Ukraine wins. But also it's important to work with Russians. We already see that there are definitely two Russias. This Putin, his elites, and this 24/7 brainwashed by zombifying Kremlin's propaganda population, but also Russia of normal people, both in country and in exile, and more in exile now. Yes, again, Russia, pro-democracy Russians, in big masses, it's a massive scale evacuation at the moment, and in prior years as well. So if at first, when Sandis remembered that I had to flee from Russia for my pro-democracy work, It's just there were just dozens of us, but then it became hundreds, thousands, hundreds of thousands. Now it's millions, and it's important again to engage us pro-democracy Russians to all these efforts to stop the war, but also again to think about future, and they will be the agents of change and those who will be rebuilding Russia. Plus, it's a psychological war, and it's very important to have to profile everybody. Putin now, again, it's very important. Was very important not to underestimate him. He basically was voicing his intentions, and I wouldn't underestimate his bluff with whatever he's saying, his threats with nuclear strikes. In 2018, right after he again was re-elected, he was saying that yes, we have nuclear power and everybody will die, but we will go to heaven. He's really, yes, we should be very serious about these words. What I know for sure, again, all these KGB tactics, they are studying their opponents, they profiling everybody, and it's important that again we are also well equipped. We understand this behavioral pattern, we understand their psychology, where they go, what they believe in, and do the same. Maybe even on some leaders of NATO countries it's important to do, but yeah, definitely on some such dictators as Putin. So I'll probably stop here. There are a lot of things I want to discuss, but I really want to hear your questions. Thank you.
We have actually already 38 questions, so like once we will have the first round of ideas and comments, we will open the questions and answers. For the next one, I would like to give the floor to Dr. Martin Zaborowski, who is Policy Director, Future of Security Program at GlobSec. Martin, the floor is yours.
Well, really, I mean, I would rather respond to a targeted question. So if that's something that you would want me to elaborate on, I'm very happy to do that. I mean, other than that, I can just say that clearly with the situation in Central and Eastern Europe being at the forefront of developments in Ukraine, we are facing a very difficult moment. There is an influx of refugees in Warsaw. There is in Warsaw alone about over 300,000 people. And in Poland now, it's 1,700,000 people who cross the border. So this really is an influx of historic proportion, and as of now, I think that as of now, the various Central European countries, Poland, Slovakia, Moldova, have dealt relatively well with that situation. However, it runs to a great degree on a goodwill of civil society, and it's really the civil society itself that is providing, a bulk of support for. A bulk of support, and as of now, the state institutions have been accommodating of things like education, healthcare, and so on. But there are, for example, no refugees camps to speak of. I mean, it's a good thing that there are, not many refugees camps, but maybe some will become necessary with the scale of that proportion. So I'm just wanted to say that I think that we don't quite grasp the gravity of situation and its implication for the neighboring nations at this point in time. So that's on that aspect, on the immediate aspect concerning the issue of refugee. The other thing is that you probably are aware that the prime ministers of Poland, Slovenia, and Czechia have traveled to Kiev today, are on the way to Kiev. I'm not entirely sure how we're going to get there, but it's an important show of support, I believe, and I think it's also coming at a very important time when Kiev is under intense shelling. So you do have certainly Central and Eastern Europe staying shoulder to shoulder with Ukraine to the extent that is possible, and I hope that our Ukrainian friends are fully aware of that. There will be considerable implications for strategic posture here in Central and Eastern Europe, probably in the Baltic states too. We have, following the annexation of Crimea, we have hosted rotational NATO presence in the region, and that presence is relatively small. And the reason why this is small and why it is rotational is because of the existence of NATO-Russia funding act. Now, this NATO-Russia funding out is basically dead because Russia has killed it itself. The funding act is based on the assumption that the Western forces will not be stationed in Central and Eastern Europe as long as the security environment remains there unchallenged. Well, it is obviously very challenged. So that means that within the scope of the next few days, I would imagine, if not weeks, there will be calls from Central and Eastern Europe for the change of NATO's strategic posture in the region, moving from rotational to permanent presence, and to extend nuclear deterrence to the states that join NATO after end of communism. So there will be, I believe, lots of strategic changes there, and at the same time, situation remains very vulnerable. Day before yesterday, Russians attacked installation near Lviv, 20 kilometers away from the Polish border. So this is, you can hear actually shelling in Poland itself now. So this is becoming truly dense and tense, and things can get out of hand, pretty quickly.
Thank you very much, Dr. Zaborowski, for your remarks. As the next one, I would like to give the floor to Yuri Zakarchuk, who is Counselor at Embassy of Ukraine in the Republic of Latvia. Counselor, the floor is yours.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I will be brief, for I believe this is no time for abstract discussions or any kind of intellectual exercises. We had this privilege taken away from us on the night of February 24th. This time is for action. I will be in agreement with other distinguished speakers here. If any lessons for tomorrow, as the subject of our current discussion says, can be drawn at all at the moment out of this, mind you, still unfolding and very much unresolved situation, is that we failed. We failed to recognize the magnitude and priority of the threat of Russia, not only for its immediate neighborhood, but all the countries known as Western-type democracies, including even those beyond the transatlantic security space. We failed to prioritize security over economic gains and prosperity, forgetting that the former is a mandatory precondition for the very existence of the latter. We failed to maintain the alertness, readiness to act of our international institutions, which we had established after World War II to prevent specifically the horrors that are now unfolding in my country. But most importantly, we failed to listen to and actually heed the call of those who knew all along what Russia actually is and what does it represent, including Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, who endured the horrors of occupation by Russia after World War II, including Poland, whose people, statehood, and independence through history was a repeated hostage to Russia's imperialistic appetites, including Ukraine, whose very existence has been under direct military threat from Russia for 8 years now. If we all are to learn some lessons or any lessons at all for tomorrow, if we are even to have any kind of secure, predictable tomorrow, then it is that each and every one of us needs to start acting right now to stop Russia and make it so Russia is irreversibly incapable of harming anyone ever again, whatever it takes. We know there is no way around it. Let's admit, we know it with absolute, almost scientific certainty that if Russia is going to continue its expansion. We know it is not going to stop at the former Soviet Union countries either. I know I may have to disappoint those people who think they are now absolutely safe for the sole reason of being behind the shields of NATO. It has been apparent for at least a decade that Russia is perfectly capable of crippling the ability of countries to resist its malignant will by using a variety of non-military means to which NATO has no adequate response right now. Extraordinary times call for extraordinary measures, no matter how tough they are on our societies or national economies. If giving Ukraine every possible kind of military means and weapons to fight off Russia's invasion brings closer the goal of neutralizing Russia's threat, even in spite of the risk of making Vladimir Putin angry, it must be done. So must be the complete, not easily reversible withdrawal of every international business from Russia. The complete switchover to supplies of energy resources from any other source than Russia. The full-scale disintegration of Russia from the global financial system. The stopping of smuggling of goods into Russia to circumvent these sanctions. With the exception of true refugee seekers, the withdrawal of European visas for Russian citizens who, instead of taking responsibility for sorting out the mess in their own country, now run away from it to safe havens they had absolutely no part building. But also a clear commitment that Ukraine has actually become a priority candidate for a soon EU and NATO membership, in spite of the war, in spite of the occupation, in spite of the shortcomings in economy and domestic reforms, in spite of the fears this will make Vladimir Putin angry. And here I would like to cite the example of Latvia and the Latvian people and their support for our cause. Latvia for years has been in the avant-garde of supporting Ukraine against Russia's in our fight against Russia's aggression and our aspirations to join in NATO. The spreader of message of imminent danger of Russia to the civilized world. We are eternally grateful to the Latvian people and the Latvian governments for that. And this is time, as the thing that I've started with, this is the time of action, and this is the time to follow the suit of Latvia and other nations who give every kind of support to our nation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. I think we have to be thankful to Ukraine, the European country that is fighting for our values alone now, and I wish we from Latvia could give more. I would also say probably the same on the Baltic states, as the mood in Estonia and Lithuania in the Baltic area is pretty much similar, as you are portraying really like heroic acts against overwhelming military assault from Russia. And as you are withstanding it, it's like you still manage to act with dignity, which is something that Russia has obviously failed. The Russian military force is committing so many crimes, and we are seeing so many atrocious pictures and videos from Ukraine, which is a crime. And I very much hope that very soon all those will be brought to justice. Last but not least, I would like to give the floor to Colonel Kaspars Pudāns, who is the 1st Brigade Commander of the Latvian National Guard. So Kaspars, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon. It's also a great pleasure to be with among such distinguished panelists here. But I will draw my lessons on what we have seen these last 3 weeks Of course, it could say it's only 3 weeks, but at the same time, it's been long and heavy weeks. And as it was mentioned here, of course, we recognized already a while ago that, of course, Russia will be willing to somehow test and employ its military power, but we never probably thought, and we failed to recognize that they could go for such a brutal war and aggression with military force. So I have maybe 4 points on current lessons we can draw for us about threat, about NATO, about our possible actions for our readiness for any crisis in the future. First, about threat itself. Of course, much been discussed and said about how Russia is probably failing in their adventure currently, and this is something we can definitely say that Russian military capability, credibility and image is shattered currently, and particularly I would say this conventional force credibility is shattered. And what we can expect, of course, as a response to this of Russia, immediately, of course, we don't know how that war will evolve and what actions will be done. Already we see then, of course, reorganization, both in command and leadership positions probably we can expect, but also resupplying and reshifting their plans. And we already noticed how they're changing their targeting. But looking in the further on in development of force, of course, I see the 2 ways. Now, once they recognize that the conventional forces failing, and now seems not so superior against the NATO or at least eastern states of NATO, then of course they will much rely now and promote their nuclear capability, nuclear power, including sub-strategic weapons, which they're developing and announced a couple of years ago. So this is what we can hear probably in the future in their rhetorics, reminding and sort of blackmailing us with such weapons they could have, because and it will be similar like it was maybe in 90s when their armed forces was very low and weak, we could say, and this is something they only had this nuclear deterrent for Russia. So, but at the same time, question now is what they will do now. Of course, learning their lessons about rebuilding or continuing modernization of their conventional force. We know that the state armament program is more balanced and more looking at technological advantage of or racing in technological competition with the West. But now they will have to not so much probably develop into the technologies, but also rebuild just simple vehicles and simple weapon systems they've been destroying during this failure of their adventure. So, and that's where they will have to shift their priorities. And my take on this, and the main danger is that they will want to rehabilitate their military power very quickly and soon to demonstrate that they are still great power with great military. And the quickest way to react on this and find any easy target to grab or inflict the pain is through air power or through the using of long-range fires and missiles. So my take on this, that we can see probably shift in development on this front or on these capabilities. Of course, positives that these current sanctions and developments might be very difficult to develop such capabilities. Their manufacturing workflows ineffectiveness is something that will hamper them to work on such development of technologically advanced or enabled weapon systems and armament. So, but at the same time, of course, they will have to rebuild them, their mechanized and armored forces, which they have to refill again. Second lesson is more on our side, NATO deterrence. Can we assess now already if NATO deterrence works or not? So I don't know exactly for myself what was particularly decision made by Putin attack or act now in Ukraine. Was it his miscalculation is what was said here, maybe bad assessments of achieved results already during other campaigns, hybrid activities, or maybe just angry impatience? We just need to inflict pain and aggression on this. So we don't know. But we see that military power, what Ukraine developed during these last 8 years, didn't deter Russia at all. So he went into full-fledged war against Ukraine. So I don't know what currently to assess. I think what we already do, our activities on the NATO, particularly in eastern flank of NATO activities, by developing nationally military capabilities and national resilience against any threats, and also NATO initiatives like enhanced forward pressure and other troops, and an exercise what is going in the right way. So we're doing, and we have to continue on the same, like, and also to demonstrate this, our resilience against any shock, what they can bring quickly. Particularly what I said, our readiness against any missile and air attacks. So this is particular areas where we can develop. Maybe what more could be done through the NATO and states itself is also to coordinate not only on military resistance, how we will fight and defend and deter, but also on civilian side. I know NATO, of course, working on this civilian resilience goals, but I think there is much more merit to be put on coordination among states and governments, how to coordinate also these sectors. Looking at third lesson quickly is also, we're seeing very positive notes on how Ukraine winning on information warfare. And this is something I want to put also our attention on looking on information operations versus Stratcom and so on. So we're much, of course, putting in good efforts on and recognizing and working with strategic communications on how to reveal all the Russian activities, attempts to falsify all the events and legitimize their activities. But I think for such scenarios, we need to be ready also for, I would say, this offensive information activities. So we have to be ready also we will disrupt and deceive adversary decision-making, their leadership, their command control efforts, but also how we will reach out to that targeted audience, which is Russian population and Russian soldiers. So also we need to be ready for this. So not to be afraid also for us doing that deception and misinformation operations during such a war. And the last, of course, lesson for NATO, what we will have to learn, and I don't have now an answer, but definitely where we have to put attention, how do the military assistance would work with the states like Ukraine, those who are not members of NATO, covered by paragraph 5, and not letting Putin or whatever regime will follow to blackmail us with bringing aggression against some partner nations, and at the same time putting us that we are not having any plans and how to act in such case. And this could be probably, and was probably, aim with such aggression, also seeing and continuing dividing NATO nations. Of course, it worked against him, and I think NATO nations are now much more closer and cooperating, but we don't have any answer how to support them. So that's why maybe my next question will be how our plans, how to act against once say blackmailing us with their nuclear deterrence or nuclear attacks. So question will be, what's next if next target is like Finland, for example?
It's a really good question, and also for Finns to think about EU members that are not NATO members but still belonging to Europe and the same community. Before I open for a broader question, I had one specific question that one of the participants, Anna Emilie Onsula, has asked to us. What would be the line? No, that's not the one. It's Paul Spence's, and I will address Anna Emilie's question next because it's broader and more relates to values and what should we do as Europeans, as transatlantic community. But Paul Spencer has asked the question, what's the possibility to see a NATO permanent military base in Latvia? And what kind of symbolic and strategic meaning could he have, for example, for us, but also for Russians? You know, you were mentioning that Russia must rebuild, Russia must recover also from the losses after the war, and I hope they lose quickly. And I wish all the luck to the Ukrainian military and also all the volunteers fighting against the Russian occupying army in Ukraine against the Russian army. But what would be the possibility and then the significance?
I say possibility is quite likely, as one of panelists already mentioned. We can expect strategic shifts also in defense posture, what we could see here. So, and transition, I think it's quite easy to transition from these rotational forces to permanent forces. And of course, it will be also symbolic. It's always, we can hear from Russian rhetorics what they always use this as main threat to them. Already last Friday, I think Shoigu already announced that they will have to reinforce their western flank against NATO and Western aggression, what they see. And I think it's now the time when we have to play along. So previously, probably we were cautious not to escalate and so on. I think this is out of question now. We already experienced showing a weakness. It's only encourages Russian side. And their announcement, it's nothing new. Already last year, I think last March last year, already Shoigu announced that they will create some more, 20 more new bases or units on Western flank. So let's do it and put them to stretch their resources and put more and so on. And this will decrease their capability to build it somewhere else. So make them suffer with such point.
Thank you very much. And I think like if we do it faster, maybe it will distract some of the tension from Ukraine and will make us a part of the security game, I would say. Chancellor mentioned quite many times failed. And then there is the threshold and the line. At some point, we as humans and humanity and the Westerners, meaning EU, European, NATO member states, we have the responsibility to protect. And what is the line? What is the threshold? For me, it's yesterday when we can still say we are on the right side of history. There is this Western euphoria now that, you know, there is this unity in the European Union with Germany not being in dissent anymore. Then there is this euphoria about the conflict, fixing the transatlantic relations and providing the solidarity inside NATO. Still no action, talking only, something that Russians have overtly said about NATO as the alliance. And then there are those memories of appeasement, Munich agreement, and the Western countries giving away the others to the aggressors, and it actually produced the opposite. What the Chancellor said, I think if Putin says something we shouldn't do, we have to do exactly the thing he says we shouldn't do. What is the point? You know, it's like, when do we have to engage? Do we have to wait for the chemical attack or nuclear attack or a misperception where one NATO missile flies into Baltic states or Poland? So what is the point now? And will this hesitancy actually contribute to the fractioning of the European and transatlantic alliance? Because here in Central and Eastern Europe, we think differently. And if Radoslav Sikorsky probably were leader, or some of the Central European leaders were in charge of the Western institutions, our approach might be different. So where is this point which could change the approach the West, Europe, and also the United States and NATO, they are applying to Ukraine and the conflict presently? So who would like to go first?
I can, as here being in presence, it will be a hard question for me to answer. Of course, there are two components, of course, of this. One is we can see, of course, that our legal obligations is not in place, and this probably is something deterring Western, and of course, this nuclear deterrence or nuclear threat by Russia, because once we engage, of course, as a military, we would be ready, but are we sure that our societies are ready, that immediately any strike of these missiles and so on could hit also one of our capitals at the same time? At the same, there is moral aspect or factor of this, that while I was saying that we should be threatened or aware of this potential threat on missile strike on Riga, for example, but at the same time we're seeing it's already happening in Kiev. So why we shouldn't engage and so on. But there was, what should be the line? I think all you mentioned examples will be already a bit too late. That's why was my last point of a lesson, that we have to pre-plan already what is these criteria or indicators, and how we have the assistance package, what we could do in this case, like only by supplying additional training or equipment already in advance or throughout the phase all the question about closing airspace and so on. So it should be already put in plans, and this is one of lessons what we have to prepare for next case once partners would be threatened.
Thank you very much for this remark that we have to have plans in place, to respond to such situations. Who would like to take next the question? Councillor, yeah. I can see.
Thank you. I think main thing that has to happen, and I use the word has because there's no other option for us. There has to happen a paradigm shift. We are unfortunately still talking about this Russia-Ukraine conflict in terms of whether we do have obligations to help Ukraine or not, whether we do have capabilities to help in certain areas or not. The problem about this frame of thinking is we are still disregarding the fact that Russia will not stop at Ukraine. Their goal is very clear. Their goal is to acquire the position which the Soviet Union had before the Cold War. This is dictated mainly by the sense of loss in the Cold War. This is, for them, it was a zero-sum game. And this was a loss in Cold War, and they haven't been able. I hate to, and I will not quote Mr. Putin saying that, but it is clear to us now that we should be thinking of how we fend off and eliminate the threat itself. Not, I don't mean Russia, but eliminate the threat which Russia poses together. And Ukraine has been contributing to this greatly, especially in the last 20 days. But it is not about helping us do something. It is about us joining our effort to eliminate the threat to the European continent.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Dr. Martin Zaborowski, do you have any remarks on this? I can see Ambassador Shota Guineri is raising the hand online. So, Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you, Sandis. Thank you very much. And I can only agree with Yuri. Actually, this paradigm shift there is something that is indispensable to the adequate response to what is happening there in Ukraine. And, I think I was talking before about the process of how we got here. And the main aspect of that question is in this understanding or the policy or the approach, I don't know what to call it, of avoiding the conflict with Russia at all costs. Of course, now, I'm not saying that anybody wants war with Russia, anybody wants conflict with Russia. It's absolutely different. We just have to understand what betters Russia and what provokes Russia. Whenever, like a shark, it smells the blood, it is impossible to stop it anymore. The same goes to this so-called strategy of hybrid strategy of Putin. He makes a small step. He tests the ground. He observes the reaction from the West, and then based on this, he makes the next step. So when he hears in number of European capitals that the strategy actually is to avoid conflict at all costs, then it is, of course, the encouragement for him to proceed with his aggressive policy and to collect concessions and to collect the gains from bullying its neighbors and from actually picking the fruits from his strategy. So now what I'm saying is that actually the West has to come up finally with its own approach, vision, strategy, and the action plan of how it wants to deal with the countries which are not yet members of European Union and NATO, which Russia sees as its sphere of exclusive influence, as some other actors see it in between, EU and Russia. But actually, the main thing here is that we are there not as the objects of competition, but as the subjects. And we are the subjects of international law, the sovereign countries that have made our own decision about our future, about our policies, about how we want to develop our countries towards what ends and through what means. Now, from this perspective, this ultimatums that Russian Federation has put forward, that they're demanding that there will be no expansion of NATO, and NATO does not have a right to deploy certain weaponry which can be perceived by Russia as a threat. What does it mean? I mean, it's not even a respectful proposition, even as the ultimatum, because anything can be considered as a threat, right? So the approach that they were indulged actually to have for so long needs to change only through this positive agenda of the West, and by clearly showing that these countries are not the countries in between, or even more so, these countries are not the sphere of Russian influence and can never be. But these are the countries that made their own decision, and here is the plan how to incorporate them fully into the European and Euro-Atlantic integration, in other words, into the free world. So now the real answer for Putin about his ultimatums that he actually has put forward before the war is not the piece of paper that he received from Brussels and from US, but the answer that Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine will receive about the application for the perspective of joining European Union. So this will be the real response. If there is any hesitation, if he still sees that, okay, no, these countries are not something that the Western family and community sees as its part, and there are, these contradictions still, it will be another encouragement for him to double down on his pressure and to again collect concessions from his aggressive policies. So now, after we're able somehow to stop this madness and the war in Ukraine, which is of course the top priority, or in parallel to this, we need to be careful about the political signaling, not to actually create the false understanding for Putin what is achievable and what is not achievable through his aggressive policies. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Shotoguneri. It's really nice to hear you, the ambassador of Georgia, the country that was under the Russian attack in 2008, and then the chancellor of Ukraine, whose country is presently under attack. Dr. Martin Zaborowski, do you have any ideas how to stop Russia and quickly?
Well, honestly, I mean, there are two things. I mean, number one, it was, I want to join in the call with the ambassador and the others that Ukraine should be granted EU candidate status very soon and move into the negotiation status as soon as achievable. I want to point out that at the European Council meeting on the 10th of March in Versailles, Ukraine was given a European perspective. It was being said very, very clearly that Ukraine belongs to the same family, that its future is with the Europeans. So it's out there. But unfortunately, the EU leaders were not courageous enough to grant European the full candidate status to Ukraine at this point in time, which was regrettable, but it's only a matter of time, I think. Because, look, like about a month ago, the European aspiration of Ukraine were seen as a fantasy almost. Nowadays, Ukraine is very firmly on a path to become a full member. And we can talk about the framework of that, but this is perhaps not the forum for that. About how to stop the war, I mean, the war cannot really be. There is one way of stopping the war. It's the key to that is in Russia. That's the way of stopping the war. As for the Western action in that, what could have been done was pretty much done. Sanctions are being enacted. Sanctions are very serious. United States has banned now imports of gas and oil from Russia. The EU has not done it yet, but it's on a path of doing that. So this is only a matter of time that the sanctions will become as hard and as strong as the sanctions you have in Iran. So that's what the West could have done. I think that the other thing that the West could have done and should be doing, should be definitely considering, is to indeed provide Ukraine with a very decent air force. I mean, I think it was all this argument about who's going to provide Ukraine with MiG-29, moving this MiGs between Poland and and Germany and the United States. It was all too public and unnecessary. But I think after the recent announcements of Ryabkov that NATO's convoy deliveries would be legitimate targets for Russia, I think it's time for NATO to take this decision and to actually provide Ukraine with air force and stop hesitating. More hesitating on that only encourages Russia to do more nasty things. So I think let's just move on that as soon as possible.
For this last remark, I think it's like we really have to raise the bar of our resistance and support to Ukraine as high as we can, because there is no rule, no principle inside NATO that would keep the NATO member states from supporting Ukraine, notwithstanding engaging militarily for humanitarian reasons alone. Thank you very much for this. Natalia, do you have any comments on this?
Yes, sure. Well, I agree with the Chancellor absolutely that this is not the war between Russia and Ukraine. It's or Russia attacking Ukraine. It's the war between the dictatorship and the democratic world, and we are all together in this. It's a civilizational choice, a civilizational future. And I agree that we all failed. Voices of pro-democracy Russians were not strong enough, not heard enough when we were saying that, look, please pay attention to what's happening inside Russia. All these domestic repressions, they won't stay in the borders of the Russian Federation. That people like Putin and his circles, they want more powers, they want to grab more lands. And I really don't understand why the same scale sanctions were not possible in 2008 and definitely in 2014. Yes, it could be a totally different situation at the moment. And also, I also think that the West also has some guilt in all this, because it's always two sides of one coin, right? If Putin was able to become who he is now, it's again, somebody also allowed him to do that, and all this malign activity, especially kleptocratic practices and everything else, they had enablers of his regime. They were groups and interests that were inflating his confidence and in his outlook, what the world is, and his, like, if he was exporting this corruption, somebody was importing this. And I don't know if it's enough now for some, like, I don't know, lobby firms and PR firms and bankers and other groups, if it's enough now to say, after the war, yes, we are against, we don't have Russian clients any longer, or these oligarchs, whatever. Is it enough? Are they white and fluffy now? Are we going to forget about them? But also, it's as lessons as everything else, it's very important not to underestimate. Yes, I think we all underestimated like how insane Putin is, and that he's ready to do anything. And that's why I would really encourage to be very serious about his nuclear threats, threats. And it's important to study, to see what is his next move, what is his next, what is his ultimate plan. I think we all understand it. But is he, later, will he be ready to capitulate, to negotiate, or to blow up? It's very important. It's again, it's not the war of Ukraine only, it's the war of the entire world, and we all should be very serious about it. It's also important not to underestimate unity. I think what Putin did is I think EU has never been as united and strong as the NATO and everybody else, and so it's important. Again, it's our common war. It's also important not to underestimate Russians, pro-democracy Russians, and I understand the sentiment that it's better, it would be better for us to stay inside Russia. We tried. Believe me, I didn't want to leave my country. My threat was 20 years in jail. I know that I could be, and I know that Navalny returned and he's in jail. He's now facing 13 more years, and many other people who stayed there, they're real heroes. And I think people who fled and who kept, who remained in this fight for a free Russia, they will be doing this, and they will be very instrumental in many things. And I know that, again, for me, my first country of immigration was Lithuania, one of the Baltic countries, and there I understood that activism doesn't end with borders. Borders are very often mental. We just need to understand wherever we are, we can always do something to change the situation in our home country. So I think it's very important. And plus, we all know from history that these democratic transformations in Eastern European countries, in Poland, in Baltic states, in Ukraine, in Georgia, the diaspora played a very significant role. Very often people from diaspora were coming back as reformers, parliamentarians, even presidents. And so it's, I think it's an important group to work with, and really shouldn't be neglected. Plus, again, we know our country very well. We understand people better than, again, many Western experts, and we can, again, advise on how to target Russian audiences, and plus we know the regime better than anybody else. As Putin underestimated Ukrainians, which was his suicidal mistake, we all so impressed and admire this absolutely heroic leadership of President Zelensky, but also courage and bravery of each and every Ukrainian. I don't know if it's an urban legend, but again, when even an old lady can destroy a Russian drone with a jar of pickles, I think this is absolutely amazing. And so it's with stamina, with this love of the country and all this. I don't know how he could even think about that he will be welcomed. I don't know. But it's also very important not to overestimate, again, what we see now, capabilities of Russian army. It's it's very laughable. Maybe there are some very limited troops that can be competed on the world level, but mostly it's Potemkin village, it's facade. It's we see it they have already logistical problems. Well, they're very poorly equipped. The morale there is no morale. They don't know what many of soldiers just absolutely misinformed where they are with all this, and no motivation, no training, no again, huge logistical and communications problem. We already see it. So plus we shouldn't probably overestimate the power of propaganda. It can collapse very soon, very fast. And again, that's why it's very important to target Russian citizens. And you probably know that absolutely all the independent media are now shut down in Russia, and less social media are available. And there are less and less. The window of opportunities is closing to reach those audiences. And what we are trying to do is, again, to use whatever we have, and we need help, again, with all these technical solutions, everything else, circumvention of all this censorship and blocking, informational blockade. As I said before, that there are two Russias, again, Russia of normal people and pro-Putin Russia, and it's this war changed the proportions and also increased the split between these two Russians. Very often it was before, predominantly it was how people consume the information. Those who were, again, getting the news from television, it's one story, and those who were getting from internet and social media is another story. It's important not to lose these people. It's important to increase the number of normal Russians. And so I hope we can all agree on that and just work together on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Natalia. The last question probably today, and I just want to remind we have quite many questions from people following this discussion online. We have 56 questions, and from them 27, 25, 23 mention NATO, Russia, Ukraine. The next is war. Then the next is sanction, possible sanction, country, Russia, fly zone, so no fly zone. Very few mention actually Putin. Case power, next, EU, very few, 4 answers from 56. The situation, scenario, relationship, and action. So there are so many questions that are relating to NATO as the main security provider for Europe and how to address this. And the question is like, if NATO is the biggest security provider with the biggest potential, having the United States the major military power in the alliance, all things remaining the same, how will NATO be viewed after this conflict if we provide assistance to Ukraine and do not engage? If the assistance as it is, like it's economic, it's military, but given to the Ukrainians, to the Ukrainian military to fight against Russia, how this alliance will be viewed after the conflict into the future? So who would like to take this one, complicated one? The Chancellor, probably your perspective at the moment is the most important.
Thank you. Again, I may have to return to what I've said already about the paradigm shift. If we are to presume that NATO is going to be perceived separately as a separate entity from this from this whole ordeal which is happening, this will not be the right way to look at the things, because we know for certain, as I had mentioned earlier, we know for certain that for years, at least a decade, Russia has been very, very successful in conducting different kind of non-military undercover operations in NATO countries. There are allegations of them influencing the United States elections. There are allegations, very, very grounded allegations of them influencing the referendum in the Netherlands on the association agreement with Ukraine. There is clear connection and motives of theirs with the construction of Nord Stream 2 in Germany. And I am not even trying to recount those cases where people were arrested in different countries. Austria comes to mind right away, where people were arrested for providing Russia with all kinds of intelligence and different kind of information. This war has not started 20 days ago, and this war is not specifically between Ukraine. There is a separate, so to say, separate aspect of Ukraine to Putin in this war. He wants to punish the Ukrainian people for being disobedient, for being for ousting Viktor Yanukovych, whom Putin considered I would say a done deal for Ukraine. He thought he had this person in Ukraine forever to rule us in the way that Putin would want. there is a separate aspect of that, but this is larger than Ukraine. This is bigger than war in Ukraine. No matter how horrible the suffering of Ukrainian people is, this is bigger than Ukraine, and everybody have to understand. Again, I use this word deliberately. Everybody has to understand that there is no way that NATO can sit and wait until the situation resolves itself, or give support to Ukraine but not engage directly, because next will be countries in close cooperation with NATO, Finland and Sweden. And when Mr. Putin says he wants, like one of my favorite journalists, Aidar Mujdabayev, Crimean Tatar, says, if a person says they want to kill you, you better believe they intend. And this is the problem with Finland and Sweden. Where there is Finland and Sweden, there is Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. There is Poland, there is the Czech Republic, and all the others. So I think it is counterproductive for NATO to discuss the question how NATO will be perceived by any external actors after this whole deal, because there might be the case that NATO will not exist when this all ends. I mean the general problem that we are facing, the general threat of Russia that we're facing.
Thank you very much. So direct engagement. Anybody else who would like to comment on this question that is what was coming from outside? Yeah, Ambassador Shotoguineri and then Martin.
Yes. So once again, what I will try to summarize, probably this is the last intervention we will have. So I will try to summarize my main point and once again say that what we are seeing here is a direct insult from Putin's regime on the rules-based international system and on the Western interests and values in Ukraine. So whether we want it or not, whether we want to admit it or not, it will not change the reality that the world will never be the same after February 24. And that if we now try to look at what is going on in Ukraine through the prism of Ukraine-Russian war, it means that everything that we knew as the building blocks of the European security architecture, Euro-Atlantic security paradigm, or the rules-based international system, or whatever, is actually something that will be effectively destroyed. So we had a Russia conference a few days ago here in Tartu, and this Baltic Defense College is hosting this conference annually. And in his opening remarks at this conference, Ambassador Ischinger, the former director of the Munich conference, said, what we are looking at is the ground zero of European security. So Putin attacked and effectively destroyed that paradigm that kept Europe more or less safe, secure, and stable for the last 70 years, right? What are we going to do now? So are we just negotiating with Putin the terms and conditions of the ceasefire? I don't see a solution in this, because we can negotiate ceasefire today. It will be violated by Russia tomorrow. It will go forward in other countries as well. So it is not a workable solution. If we want peace, stability, and security in Europe, in the Euro-Atlantic area, we actually have to admit it. However scary and difficult to articulate this might be, we have to admit that we cannot allow Putin anymore to tackle and destroy the rules that he actually has signed up for. So if there is any, let's say, questions or hesitation by anybody if NATO or the United States has to intervene in this situation or no, I would strongly encourage them to read again the Budapest Memorandum of '94, where the Russian Federation, alongside with France, UK, and the United States, are giving the permanent security guarantees for Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Whenever this the need might have been. There is no more urgent situation than today that we can imagine, right? So what is going on here? Are we actually thinking about, the conditions under which we will satisfy Putin's ambitions and he will become a constructive actor again and we can re-engage with Russia into the business as usual? No, it is not possible. So let's admit it. Let's admit that we have to stand up for the rules-based international system, norms, laws that the West is actually based on. And let's try to find ways how to really fight for that in Ukraine, alongside supporting Ukrainian people and the government of Ukraine. So coherent approach and the strategy of how to deal with this situation is absolutely indispensable to the solution, and not only helping and supporting Ukraine, which is one aspect of that strategy, but this cannot solve the problem alone. So that is something that I wanted to underline once again from my side. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. So our system and our security system is already under attack. So Dr. Marcin Zabrowski.
Let me just unmute myself. Just very briefly, really, I think as we are thinking about, how NATO is going to be viewed, and whether it's important how NATO is going to be viewed, I think the image is important indeed, because that's the credibility of the alliance. I think it's important to just point out that NATO has already actually performed a lot of the very essential roles which are changing the dynamic of this conflict. To start with, NATO continues to supply Ukraine with weapons on a daily basis, on weapons which are, I think, quite fundamental to what's going on the ground there. So if NATO wasn't there, that would be very difficult to see. Also the intelligence that the Americans were providing in the run-up to the invasion, I think it was very crucial in preparing Ukraine for what actually happened, and also for preparing us. I also think that the decisions which were taken by the alliance in 2016 by placing rotational presence in the Baltic states, in Poland on the eastern flank, they are really making material difference to, they are raising the risks of some kind of adventures on the part of Putin. If Putin was to venture into any of his countries, he would immediately stumble upon like Americans, Canadians, Germans, Brits, and so on. So he would immediately be throwing the entire alliance into a conflict. And that's a big difference between what we have now in terms of the alliance and what was there at the outset of the Second World War, where there was no military presence on territory of Poland or Czechoslovakia, for that matter. So NATO has already done a great deal of adaptation to the current situation. It already got prepared for that following Crimea. It didn't prepare for that as much as it should have done, some of the member states. I mean, for example, I'm hearing today that there is a big scandal in France with French companies supplying, Russians with weapons despite the embargo since 2015. So if that's confirmed, that's horrible. All the dishonorable actions of Mr. Schroeder, I have no words for that. So, but as the alliance itself, I think that that adaptation has been remarkable, and NATO has already done a great job. More remains to be done, and once this is over, I think it's essential that Ukraine and Georgia are admitted to NATO with no further hesitation, no further debates, just as soon as possible.
Thank you very much, Natalia. The floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. Well, the perception of NATO will depend on how decisive and consistent the alliance continues to be. Again, it's not the war just against Ukraine, it's a war against the entire world, not only democratic world, against the entire world. And it's an existential threat. NATO countries, the entire world is already under threat. And I know that there are discussions about Articles 4 or 5 or whatever, but possibly maybe it's under such circumstances when we face such an existential threat, it's possible to adopt a new article or executive order or something else, like to be even more crucial in all this and more active. I think it's also very important to listen to Ukrainians, because they are on the ground, on the forefront, they know better what the needs is. And I really don't understand why still debate on no-fly zone or defense assistance. It's like, again, we always were saying when pro-democracy Russians, in-country Russians were telling us what they need, what they do, because they're on the ground, they know better their needs and they know better the danger. And I think it's important now to listen to Ukraine, to President Zelensky, and just again, it's survival for all of us. Plus, in all this immediate needs, when the immediate need is to stop the war, we always should remember about the future, and we understand that the world won't be the same. It's impossible. And but what will there be? Is there going to be even worse, like after Putin, more military junta, whatever? Is it going to be a more open society? Is it going to be one Russia or 10, 15 different countries? That's all, I think, very important, and we already should remember that. And again, it's not just the fight. It's not Russia without Putin. It's very important to have Russia without Putinism. And again, it won't change overnight. Values don't change overnight. It's a very long-term work, and we should already think about it, work on it. We already know that in this, we are on the right side of history, and in this textbook of history, Ukraine is already there. Ukrainian heroism and stamina and commitment, determination is already there. What about the role of NATO and the role of pro-democracy Russians? It's up to us that we will be in those textbooks as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, Colonel Kaspar Spudant.
We maybe quickly just on perception of NATO, if I would put in the military, from military point of view, and that's all depend, of course, how is the perception of currently, at least, what NATO is doing on where you will stand, where you are as a military located. So one will be us here in Baltic states, or Eastern Front, Baltic states, Poland, maybe also Finland and Sweden and so on. And I would claim that it's still positive perception. And from what we have seen during these last 3 weeks, all that commitment and quick resolve on contributing more forces to the Eastern Front and reinforcing, and all what we did already previously, and now only to intensify, and most of it only just confirmed what we have already correctly conducted. So I would say, personally myself and seeing around the others in the military on this side, would be looking at this still positively at the NATO as a guarantor of our deterrence and defense, even in cases of aggression, that NATO will be with us. If I put myself in shoes of Russian military, of course, they will just tick mark as a box that NATO is still same. So we can still deter NATO by our nuclear power. So we can still freely act against, maybe not NATO states, of course, but somewhere else, and NATO will be just observing and discussing. But if I put myself in somewhere military in our partners, Ukraine, Moldova, or Georgia, that could be some harm impression and so on. For example, of course, currently I'm in contact with my friends in Ukraine and officers who is serving there and sending their reports and feelings, how they say. Of course, there is no direct claim or direct direction at NATO being betraying Ukraine, but you can feel that, of course, sense of what we're doing, supporting with the weapons, it's not enough. They're, of course, looking more at direct involvement and direct support, and maybe some credibility of NATO would be lost in the eyes of our partner militaries.
Thank you very much for this last final note, the military one. I just want to summarize, today's discussion to conclude it. So we need to adapt to the new challenge, but at some point, as you said, the paradigm must change because the European security system has been under assault, if not since 2014, I would say 2008, and we have two diplomats here discussing and unveiling the challenges for their countries. Since our system and security system in Europe and values especially is under assault, we have to do everything to help Ukraine because Ukraine alone at the moment is fighting for the values on which European security system was built. I just want to thank all the experts for joining me today and all the questions that we have received from outside, and thank you very much, and you have a good day.